Hello everyone, I'm here with Mary Zunick, who's the Hot Springs Cultural Affairs Manager, and this is the latest installment in our ongoing Gallery Walk Talk series, which is the first Wednesday every month. And per usual, Mary's here to talk not just about Gallery Walk, but here to interview a local artist. So last month, our discussion was with Dolores Justice, who owns the Justice Art Gallery in downtown Hot Springs. And you can still go back and watch that video here on the library's Facebook or YouTube channel. And tonight, Mary is about to introduce a special guest, Gary Simmons, who's featured in Justice Art Gallery, and he's a ink and pen artist. He does great work. He's well known here in Hot Springs. But I'm going to let Mary here give him a more formal introduction. So good to see you again.
Thank you. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for letting me share information about our arts community. And it's so nice that we can share information safely from home, and people here in Garland County, but even across the country and around the world, can tune in and find out about the great things we have going on in Hot Springs. And our arts community is certainly a part of some of the awesome things that make Hot Springs unique. We are one of the top arts towns in the country, and we have been for many years. And part of the reason for that is because of our thriving arts community and the artists who have moved here. Back in 1989, a group of artists, a group of gallery owners, put together the very first gallery walk. That took place in August. So next month, Gallery Walk on August 6th will be the 32nd anniversary of Gallery Walk. That's continued every single month, even during the pandemic. We had, I think, one month where there was a virtual Gallery Walk, but there has always been a Gallery Walk. And so thanks to the many galleries who take part in that each month, and invite the public in the first Friday of every single month to come in and see the new exhibits. Artists are there who are featured in those exhibits, and it's really such a wonderful gift to our community. Many of them even serve refreshment, and so they invite the public in. So I just encourage everyone that when you start thinking about purchasing a gift, or you have a special event coming up, or even if you're redecorating your home and want artwork to hang it, please look at our local galleries and support our local galleries and our artists. We truly have some of the top in the country. And tonight, we certainly have one of them with us. A dear, dear friend to me and so many others here in Hot Springs, Gary Simmons, is joining us this evening. Gary has a reputation. His reputation is founded upon his virtuosity with pen and ink, a medium he taught for rapidograph pens in their national workshop program. He has written the Technical Pen Techniques for Artists and produced even an educational video, a pen and ink demonstration by Gary Simmons. Gary, best known for his draughtsmanship and his highly accomplished pen and ink drawings of a wide variety of subject matter. He has executed a wide variety of large portrait montages, Western subjects, equine scenes, nudes, landscapes, animals, and mythology, including several series based on Leda and the Swan. In addition to pen and ink, Gary has worked in terracotta sculpture, graphite, pastel, lithography, oil paint, and watercolor. He has recently begun concentrating specifically on the combination of watercolor and ink, as well as oil painting. Gary's work has hung in the Arkansas Governor's Office, the Clinton White House, and in the home of celebrities such as English authoress Mary Stewart, Thoroughbred Racing's Hall of Fame trainer Jack Vanberg, and Hollywood producers Harry Thomason and Linda Bloodsworth. The eclectic approach to Gary's art grows out of his equally eclectic background. His bachelor's and master's degrees are in English and American literature. His doctorate is in instructional systems, technology, and photography. His jobs have included science illustration, teaching, photography, graphic designs, and system analysis. He ran his own design studio for 10 years, co-owned the design studio Stevens and Simmons, Inc. for 5 years, taught pen and ink workshops nationally for 3 years, and taught art for Henderson State University from 1991 until 2013 when he retired as professor emeritus. He has been awarded the Arkansas Art Council Governor's Individual Arts Award and was honored with the Arkansas Advertising Federation's Distinguished Educator Award. In general, Gary's interests, and therefore his art, are all over the map. He is infatuated with organic nature of life and its results, especially those reflected in the human psyche and its amble through natural history and time. Gary's studios here in Hot Springs, where he lives with his wife, June. He does have 2 wonderful daughters, Jamie and Rebekah, and grandchildren. And we are so fortunate to welcome Gary Simmons to us this evening. And I would be remiss if I also didn't mention all that Gary does for our community in supporting so many local organizations. He was on the Arts Cooperative team. He's currently on the Hot Springs Area Cultural Alliance Advisory Board. And he's been a great partner for Cut Well for Kids and their Birth of an Artist events that take place each August. So please join me this evening, Gary Simmons.
Hi, Mary.
Hi there, Gary. I should have put you up there when I was reading that awesome bio.
Yeah, well, I'm a blushing.
Yeah, that would have been it, just to watch you blush.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being with us this evening.
My pleasure.
There in your home studio, and I just have a kind of a list of questions that we'll walk through a little bit here. I know I shared a lot about you in your bio there, but one thing in your home studio, something that I would like for you to share just a little bit about with us before we take off through the questions is what takes place in your home studio each week on Thursday, you and a group of artists.
Back in 1976, 3 of us who are still doing it started a Life Drawing Co-op. And we meet, as of now, last several years, we've met in my studio. Over the years, we've met all over places, trying to find places. But we figure we've worked with 250, 300 models over the years. And the size of the group varies depending on who's available and so forth. But it's been just one of those things, like Gallery Walk, it's been one of those institutions that has kind of held us together and has become very important to a few of us.
Well, thank you. I just wanted you to share a little bit about that with us because that's not something that I mentioned in your bio, and certainly a wonderful part of artists coming together here in Hot Springs to work together and camaraderie. A lot of times artists are at home in their studios by themselves, and it's wonderful that you come together to share an opportunity like that and have continued it since 1974.
It keeps our neighbors very interested because they wonder, why are all those cars out there every Thursday night? Everything's
weekly party at Gary's house.
Yeah, we've even had them stop us on the street and ask, what are you doing in there?
Well, what path led you? It sounds like you made a few loops around the block before you ended up at art. What path led you to art? How did you end up as an artist?
I had a photography instructor say mine was an ant's trip across the sidewalk. And that's kind of the way it's been. But yeah, I've always drawn. I mean, even as a child, that was something I did. But it took me years and years to accept the fact that I was an artist. I had in my mind, because I'm not officially trained as an artist, I had in my mind that you had somehow to have credentials or something. And finally, in '76, that just came to a head. And I said, okay, I don't care. What you call it, that's what I'm doing. And with a brave wife, I jumped ship and started freelancing. So went from there.
So is it a matter of finding your bliss? Have you found your bliss with art?
Yeah. It's a matter of quit jumping through other people's hoops, which we all do. But we have the disadvantage as artists because unlike Asia and Europe, which have deep cultural aesthetic traditions America's gods are the middlemen and the corporations. So when you tell somebody as a kid you want to be an artist, you get very little encouragement. The first thing you hear is you're going to starve to death. So it takes a long time for we as individuals to sort that out and find our own way, because it has to be done by us. It won't be done by the culture. And that was true in my case.
So your aunt's trip across the sidewalk, do those other experiences influence your art?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm convinced that everything we do in life influences everything else we do, one way or the other. And the literature and the writing and so forth have been a benefit to me. The science background has certainly been a benefit. The organization I did in the research institute helped. All of those things kind of coalesce in one way or another to help you become who you are. And a lot of times we don't even recognize it, but those influences are very strong. When I started college, I was in an industrial design program for 2 years and did not realize for a long time what a significant impact that had on the way I look at things and the way I approach my art.
Well, you've been so kind to prepare several slides with us. So I have some more questions for you, but I know the reason we're all here is to hear you speak about your art, but we certainly want to take a look at some of your art too. Yeah. So I am going to go ahead and start our slideshow here so that everybody can see. There we are. So is that how you see yourself, your note to self there?
Hey, Mary, you'll have to share your screen again.
Oh.
And while you're doing that, I just want to remind everyone watching, if you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to post those, and I'll jump back in at the end and read those off.
Okay. Is that better?
No.
Is it not?
No. I think you'll have to share from the beginning again, like you did.
Okay, there we go.
and tell me when you're, go ahead and start the slideshow.
It says that I shared it. Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, Gary. Every time I do a program, there's always some sort of technical difficulty. So there we go.
That's the nature of the business, isn't it?
Yes, and I'll even remember to hit the stop at the share where it doesn't show the buttons anymore. Can you see it now?
No, you closed it out, I think. I had it. I was just as I was adding it, it removed it.
Not known for my technology skills.
You don't know how much better you're making me feel.
Okay, how's that, Paul?
Yes, I'm adding it now. So now just go full screen. There we go.
Okay, I'm going to hit hide this time instead of stop sharing. Okay, there we go. There's, so I'm assuming this is you, Gary. And is that how you see yourself?
Yeah, especially these days. But yeah, there's a certain kind of whimsy that's been in my art all along. And these are the kind of things that actually I enjoy most of all doing. But sometimes I figure I need to take myself a little more seriously. So anyway, this is just fun. And it's kind of an old guy that has my foibles.
Well, I love your sense of humor too, and I've been very fortunate to have several of your pieces. In fact, there's a lot of people around the area that have several of your pieces because you always are kind enough to share them when you're sitting in a restaurant.
Drawing on the napkins. Yes,
yes, drawing on the napkins.
Yeah, that's a fun thing to do.
Okay, this one, please tell us just a little bit about this one.
Okay, some of the things I've selected are based upon the more personal experiences I've had. This was the first significant personal piece that I did for myself, and it's based on a Cheyenne medicine man, Chief Wolfrope. Comes from a dream I had where he marked from a golden eagle into himself and told me how I could communicate with eagles. And he said, press the wingtips to your lips and blow, and I'll understand. And that was the evolution of this piece.
your inspiration came from a dream. Did
Yeah, it was a full Technicolor MGM dream. Yeah, I sat straight up in bed about 9 o'clock in the morning and said to my wife, "You're not going to believe this dream." It was incredibly detailed, incredibly vivid, all kinds of dialogue. I don't know. I had drawn his face several times. It's based upon a photograph owned by the Smithsonian. And I assumed that subconsciously that's where it was coming from. But it was just an extraordinary dream. I still remember it very vividly. And this was back in the 70s.
Oh, wow. So it was he chose you maybe to share that dream. Now, have you ever read a story or anything that's similar to that, or just?
Well, I thought for a long time I would do something with it. I thought about it for about a year and didn't do anything with it. I finally drew his face, and that hung in the studio for about 6 months. That was in pencil before I came to some resolution about how I wanted to handle the eagle. And then so that finally all came together. But yeah, I think it's a combination of my fascination with birds, particularly birds of prey, and the Native Americans. I did a lot of Western kind of things in the early years when I was drawing.
And now on this one, you said the dream was in Technicolor, yet you chose to use only, not doing it in color. Why did you choose the medium that you chose for this one?
Because that was basically the only medium I knew. The way I started, without any formal training, I started in pen and ink as a science illustrator with a work study program. And one thing led to another, and over the years, that became the thing I knew. And that's what I did for many, many years, both professionally and as an amateur. And it wasn't really until I started teaching at Henderson that I started to paint and to do other kinds of media. But when you're making your living and the kids need shoes, you don't change media. So I stayed with pen and ink.
Understandable. And for those of you who are watching at home, or if you're on a phone or a tablet and you can't see the detail of this, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of tiny lines that make this artwork up. How many lines do you think, Gary?
Oh, I don't know. It's called cross-hatching. And you work the lines in one direction and then work lines over them in an opposite direction. And what you do is you build up something like screen wire.
Okay, another example of that.
Yeah, and this one came out of a dream also. It came out of a kind of an environmental concern. I've always been fascinated by the great apes and the humanity that they seem to exude. Kind of comes out of that book, Ishmael, where the great ape was interviewed for his world wisdom. And in the dream, the great ape was kind of disintegrating from the waist down, kind of like lace. And in the dream itself, I actually remembered this is about the environment. So I wound up doing this drawing. It's called Paradise Lost. And this was a drawing I gave to my daughter, Rebekah, when she graduated as a veterinarian.
His eyes are, they just are so haunting.
Yeah, and another element in this are the strings, which are kind of a theme through a lot of my work, because I'm really, really interested in how incredibly interconnected everything is, and particularly everything organic. And as we're learning, of course, once you do something over here on the left, something's going to happen over here on the right, and you may not like it.
Absolutely.
This is called Superstition, and it was based upon an African mask. And this is acrylic ink in the pen. And the whole theory here is that through mythology and through superstition, we wind up codifying that superstition into something that is recognized as a cultural myth. And that's what the Celtic myth is down there on the bottom. they're not particularly related in terms of cultures, but just the fact that ultimately they coalesce into something we start to accept as truth.
So when you're creating something like this piece or the previous piece, do you work with an audience in mind and what the audience is going to gather from the artwork?
I work with what I want to communicate and hope that the audience is going to get from it. I don't work with a specific audience in mind, but I am aware of the fact that I'm wanting to say something. And that's pretty basic to all of my work. I'm hopelessly narrative. I don't know whether that's my personality, whether that's from the literature program. I don't know what it is, but I really, really need some kind of story when I'm doing something. And the little things that are wrapped around the strands are basically, that's an ancient system of memory for our primitive peoples.
And I think this one's probably pretty personal, isn't it?
Yeah, this comes out of, again, a very personal experience. My wife and I raised and reared the screech owl to adulthood. He became really part of our family. We were not married. I mean, we were married, but didn't have any children. And he became a really integral part of our lives. And we finally had to let him go because I was leaving for Indiana University. He left and became kind of a stranger to us. And the night I loaded the trailer to leave, he flew back and landed on the trailer door and sat there while I loaded the trailer. I'd always fed him moths from the porch light. And as I walked out into the darkness of this yard, I felt his 2 feet on my shoulder. And he rode with me out into the darkness, left, and I never saw him again. But the title, The Night It All Came Together, goes back to that whole thing about how connected we are and how pivotal these kinds of experiences are with the natural world.
And
this is called The Sight, and crows are just kind of my totem, I guess. I love them for their intelligence. I love them for their blackness and their beauty as a profile, but their characters, they really have character, and they're really, really interesting, as is evident through all of the many mythologies that they permeate, as jokesters, as omens, all kinds of things like that. So this is a charcoal piece that just kind of one day the tablet was on the easel and I had the charcoal, and it was one of those things that just kind of happened.
now, on your work with this one and with all of it, really, do you work from photos or your imagination? Obviously, some of them from your imagination, but how do you create the images?
Sometimes from imagination, but a lot of photos, a lot of references for the accuracy of the image. I think for me, that's really important. When I'm making something up, I want to make it up from elements of reality. I think they have the most to say. I think they're the most interesting. And in this case, for instance, I had a picture of a raven, and that's what I was working from. The background, of course, is just made up, but the bird himself is based upon that very literal image.
Interesting that the wisdom and the jokester. For those who don't know Gary out there, maybe, Gary, now what color do you always wear, Gary?
Black.
Maybe there's some of you in that.
Yeah, well, people have asked me about that, and I tell them it's really about laziness. I don't have to make much of a decision to get dressed. And it's slimming, it's always appropriate, and it doesn't show ink.
That's true. No black ink on your pocket.
Yeah. This is after I retired, like most people who retire from teaching, I was a little bit lost for a while, not quite knowing where I was going. This is autobiographical in the sense that kind of asking the crow, you know, where are we going? It's got to be out there somewhere. This is a combination. Basically, this is watercolor. Actually, I don't think there's any ink on this. This is all watercolor. But I really, really like combining animals, particularly birds, with human faces and figures. And again, the strings are there, the ropes. It's a little bit based upon kind of a worn nautical voyage, maybe. But I'm also aware of my own age, so I don't shy away too much from showing how old that looks.
And now on a piece like this, what is your process for kind of starting a piece? How do you begin to think of something like this or begin the process of creating it?
Well, with many of my pieces, and I don't think this is unusual for artists, they're pretty evolutionary. Very, very rarely do I start out with an absolutely specific design in mind. In this case, I did the man, the figure, the background, messed around with it. What can I do now that's going to make this interesting? And I added the crow, and then wound up adding the rope as a design element, and then adding the other ropes because they kind of played off of the first one. So one thing leads into another.
And how do you know when a piece is done?
When it doesn't ask anything more from you. There's a feeling when you're looking at the composition that's a little bit like an ache or like a hunger pain or something, that what's missing here? Why does this not, satisfy me? And when you can't find any answer to that, you're probably done. This is a piece called As the Crow Flies, and is based, I had a sabbatical where I spent a month out in the Southwest in the Four Corners area exploring cliff dwellings and checking out the Anasazi ruins. And it was a very haunting kind of experience, very meaningful to me. And this is, again, kind of autobiographical. When I was out in those ruins, this is kind of the feeling I had. I really don't know much more about it than that. That's just how it felt. Exploration, mystery.
It's beautiful.
This is oil, of course. This is out of that same series. I was really fascinated by the ruins, by the stonework, by the passages. I really like the idea of passages. I've done pen and ink series based on that. In fact, ruins in general are really, really interesting to me because of the kind of implications they have. They speak for more than what they are. And I like primitive things like bulldozers and tanks and locomotives, but I like things that show what they are. And I think that's why I'm so fascinated with castles, because they are exactly what they were meant for. And these ruins in the Southwest were the same way.
And now I noticed the title of this one, Quest, and several of your other titles. How do you arrive at a title for a piece of your artwork?
Well, sometimes the title is kind of before me. Often it comes afterward. It comes as a result of that evolution I mentioned. Sometimes it's just a question of finding interesting words that are going to trigger something for the viewer. I used to keep an extensive list of words and phrases I would hear somewhere, sometimes in literature, sometimes in something I was reading that made a good title. And if you append the title to that piece, it creates the narrative.
Well, as the viewer or the person experiencing the artwork, the title it enhances the meaning of the piece so much, for me personally anyway. I don't know if everyone feels that way, but it certainly does for me.
Yeah, I've never been a fan of Art 1, Art 3.
Yeah.
Those things don't say anything to me. And I know there's all kinds of theory about this should be in the eyes of the viewer and what have you, but I really believe it's a two-way street. And I'm interested in communicating. And once it's done, I have to sit on the sidelines and watch, but I want to put my 2 cents in too. This is called Last Rays, and I'm a real devotee of bison. I think they're magnificent animals, and I'm a real romantic about our American West and the tragedy that happened with the bison and the relationship it had to the Native Americans. This piece really just came together for me. It's oil, and I just really like the drama in it. I think it says, for me, something about the potential demise of that race. This is a piece called Seduction, and it's one of those evolutionary pieces. It's pen and watercolor. Started out basically with the face. One thing led to another. The beaded work came in after the feathers. And the beads down at the bottom became a kind of accent for the idea of Native American craft. The woman is just seductive. She was for me anyway.
Absolutely. She's beautiful. Now, how do you decide which pieces you will keep and which pieces you will put in a gallery or go on to someone else's home?
There are a few pieces. One, the Superstition piece I showed you, I kept because my wife won't let it go. I kept the helmet, which is not in this series, because it's a real forte for me, and I kept it for my girls because I won't do that again, that kind of work. So every once in a while, I'll keep a piece that has either some kind of particularly significant craft work in it or is something to me very personal. I kept the draft horses, which we'll see later, because it has a lot of meaning for me and because it's a piece that really shows my pen and ink work.
Oh, this one's beautiful.
This is my daughter, Rebekah, when she was about 3 or 4. And the painting comes out of a photograph I did, but it comes out of a memory. She was a delight and such a towhead. And I had an old pickup truck I had to move out of the driveway one day. And she wanted to sit in the bed of the truck, of course, which she did. And she sat up on the edge of the bed, and it happened to be right behind my rearview mirror. And I was headed east, and the sun was setting, and her hair was just on fire. And she had a grin ear to ear because the truck was moving. And that's the impetus for this piece.
Now, this is obviously your daughter. Do you ever commission pieces? And, what are the kind of issues and rewards with commissioning a piece?
I used to do a lot of portraiture, particularly the large montage portraiture. I've done some oil portraits. I've done some animal portraits and so forth. I'm at a stage where I really don't want to do commissioned work. It's a very stressful thing to do. And it kind of takes over your life because it's really all about somebody else and not about you. So I have been kind of seduced into it a time or two for money, but even that anymore is not really enough. So I'm kind of at the end of that gig. These are Rebekah's trophies. When Rebekah was, she's the veterinarian. When she was little, she and I went to the lake every day with a canoe and collected feathers, tadpoles, turtles, fish, whatever. She had 2 aquaria in her bedroom. We dug a little pond in the front yard. We went to the fishery hatchery one day, saw an eagle sitting on one of the limbs. Went under the tree after he left and found these feathers, which I'm sure were turkey vulture feathers, but we collected them as eagle feathers. And I did this drawing. This hangs in her home, and this was a drawing for her. This is Leda. I did a lot of work with Leda. I did 3 or 4 shows of just Leda. And part of it is fascination with the mythology, but it all started because of my fascination with feathers and flight. I think bird flight is absolutely one of nature's all-time miracles. And I got to thinking of Leda, who was seduced by Zeus. He came to her when she was bathing in the river. He came to her as a swan, seduced her, and out of that came Helen of Troy. And I thought, wonder what a divine swan sounds like. Must be like a helicopter. And so anyway, this was the very first of that whole series. And this is called Leda's Last Swan. And it really the whole Leda thing had to do with our dalliance with divinity, hubris, the seduction of power, all of those things that mythology likes to play around with. One of my favorite birds, great blue herons, are kind of the B-17s of the flight pattern. This is pastel, and I just love watching them. Anything that can wade in the water and not leave a wake is pretty astounding.
That's the truth. Now, how do you choose your medium? Like the swans were pen and ink, and this is pastels or watercolor. How do you decide which one you're going to use for the different artwork?
I wish I had a profound answer for that, but I don't really. Sometimes it's boredom with the other media. Sometimes it's seeing, in this case, like the whiteness of the neck and so forth, seemed like a natural being able to come in with pastel on top of the other coloration to get that kind of really, really bright coloration.
Well, and the density of the black and the purity of the white. I mean, the contrast is so vibrant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this piece. This is called the Starting Gate, and this is a big piece, 30 by 40 inches. I used to ride the gate when they changed from one side of the track to the other. I did a lot of work in the 80s on the track doing equine drawings. And the track very kindly kind of let me have the run of the track. I would go over, and when they came back around, I'd ride on the back of the gate. So it had a kind of personal meaning, but I also loved the Clydesdales. I loved the pageantry. I loved the way these guys handled the horses. This hung in Mrs. Miller's restaurant for years and years as a centerpiece of their main dining room. And I asked Bill Moore when he was going to leave if I could have it back, so I bought it back. And it hangs in my studio. And it's one of those pieces I'm saving for my daughters.
It's brilliant.
This is a watercolor piece called Just Another Monday. Harkens back to my mother's routine. She washed on Monday and ironed on Tuesday or Wednesday. But I just loved the kind of hominess of this whole thing. It was a black and white photograph I took. Don't even remember where I took it. But I converted it then, and I've really, really liked this piece.
I love this piece too. My mom always hung up our laundry too, and this one you can almost feel the cool dampness of the shadow and feel the breeze. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it was fun. This is called the Bob Sheriff's Place, and in southern Illinois, out on the prairie, this is an old home that I would visit when we were visiting some elderly friends of ours. And again, it kind of goes back to the nostalgia with ruins and just the detritus that is left, the little things like the torn up screen door and what have you, all just talk about like the missing banisters are not banisters, but balustrades. All of it's just nostalgic for me, and it's part of the way I grew up and where I grew up. So that's what it was about. This harkens back to my love affair with my own dog. I had a dog called Mugsy. Called him Muggs. He was a mutt, very, very smart dog, very protective of me. And all through my grade school years and even up into my junior high years, he was my number one confidant. This is called Secrets, and he and I had a lot of really meaningful conversations.
Oh, you can tell. There's a lot of secrets going on there.
This comes out of, it's called Far Looking Man, and it comes out of a whole series that was a new movement for me. For years, I did a lot of really technical rendering, like the draft horses and so forth. And I finally got tired of doing that, and I became more fascinated with line itself. So I started doing a series where I would start out in the middle of the page, nothing in mind, make a few lines, and see where it went from there. And this is one of those. And I did 30, 40, 50 of these pieces. They became really composition challenges and interesting draws on the visual vocabulary that I had. Things like, like pillars and posts and faces and so forth. There were no references for any of these.
I have one of these that is, I think I thought it was just your boredom from an arts meeting, but it turned out wonderful. But it does make a great statement about running an arts organization.
Yeah. Well, Jim Larkin made the comment about these pieces. It's almost like somebody maybe is still living there. Yeah. And I thought that was kind of apt. I really love the calligraphy of the brush and the pen, and that's what provoked this. It was an excuse to get to just do those kind of dabbling, sweeping kind of lines, and the nostalgia that goes with that kind of view when you're near sunset and you see these silhouettes.
And now, for all of the artists out there who see this, just a question of, how many pieces like this do you create before you end up with the one that you like? That's the final one. How many discards do you have to create this one?
I did probably 10 or 15 of these kind of pieces, but they all varied. Some were totally monochromatic. Some had color in them. All of them differed. None of them were really failures in the sense of not working as a painting. I like this one more than some of the others because of I like the concentration of the heads on the stems. I think they kind of give a little weight to the piece and kind of create a center of interest that maybe some of the other pieces didn't have.
Oh, whoops! Then that was the last one. I thought we were probably getting close to the end. And the reason I asked you that last question was because I've been in your studio before and I've seen multiple pieces of artwork that were very similar.
Yeah. I tend to run in sequences like that. I'll start something and we'll explore it quite a bit. I mean, the Leda pieces were like that. These pieces were like that. A lot of the equine pieces were like that. They were just, I can do that. I'll do more of these. I'll do the passage piece, the ruins piece with the man on it and what have you. Did a lot of those. Still do that kind of thing sometimes when I'm just doodling. Do a lot of that in my sketchbooks. Sketchbooks for me are kind of an institution. I have probably 150 sketchbooks that I started in early 70s. I have one in the living room. I have one in the car. I have one in the studio. If I go to Starbucks, I take one. If I go to a dentist office, I take one. If I go anywhere I go, it's my anti-boredom kit. So,
Do you ever go back to the sketchbooks from previous years to draw inspiration for pieces that you're creating now?
I have. I've gone back and gone through them and said, why didn't I do more of that? And it's also just an interesting archive of my own progress, both in terms of subject matter, but in terms of skill. They progress. I don't know what I'm going to do with them. I don't know what my daughters will do with them. There are a ton of them. So, but I've thought about doing a book with them. I've thought about that kind of stuff, but I've just thought about it.
Now, you are represented in a gallery, correct?
I'm in Dolores Justice's gallery, thanks to her. I was out of the galleries for, 10, 15 years, I guess. And I just worked out of my studio or workshops or what have you. But I decided to come in out of the cold. Dolores was kind enough to take me in. And so when people want to see my work, they can go there. They can always come to the studio, but she's the official representative.
Okay. Now, why would an artist choose to go in and to not be in a gallery or to be in a gallery? I've heard, many artists that go have a strong feeling one way or the other.
Well, it got to be very frustrating with galleries. First of all, they want 50%. And coming from their nature of the business, you can kind of understand why they need that. But some of them want a bit of action with everything you do, whether they're selling it or not. But the typical problem is you go in as a new person and you get a lot of coverage because you're the new kid on the block. And then somebody new comes in and you get less and less coverage as a rule. And pretty soon that's self-fulfilling, because the less coverage you have, the less you sell, which means the less incentive there is to have more of that work up. The other problem is, typically galleries say they want you to grow. They're interested in you as an artist. The problem is, what they're really interested in most of the time is why you went in the first place. In my case, they wanted pen work. That's because that's who I was. And they weren't all that interested in my painting or whatever else I was doing. It's not to say that they don't accommodate that at all. It's just that the inertia that comes with that is kind of discouraging after a while. And I found I did as well sale-wise, selling on my own, because when you're selling at 50%, you've got to sell a lot of artwork to make any money. And mostly the gallery for me is less about money and more about having a kind of spiritual home and being part of other artists and where the action is, and just participating, being part of the community.
And now, how do you decide which pieces of art go to a gallery? How do you select that, or does the gallery?
It's a cooperative thing between me and the gallery. In this case, I send Dolores things about what I have available. She reviews them and says, I think I'd like this, this, and this, and this. If I have something I really want to push, I think she'd be game for that. But obviously, she knows more about her space and about what's going on than I do. So I'm going to defer to her in that context. I'm going to also defer to her in terms of pricing. All artists, and I'm as guilty as any, underprice the work. It's really hard for us to price work at a level that we think maybe is going to be, what the market is.
That was going to be my next question, actually. How do you decide what price to put on a piece of artwork?
Oh, it's agony.
The soul it has in it.
It's agony. I hate doing it, and You have to try to, I mean, there are price breaks in the market. Like there are sometimes anything over $350 is not going to sell very well, or something over 500 is not going to sell very well, or whatever. But at the same time, there is some wisdom that says the higher it is, the more value people see in it. You know, and that's hard for me as an artist to recognize, because as the creator of that art, I don't see it the way you do. And one of the most weird things for an artist is that I am never going to see my own work. I will never look at it like you do.
Mm-hmm.
It all comes from inside me. So when I look at it, all I see is process. And so I don't see anything. There have been two instances in my life when I rounded a corner and saw my work for a millisecond and didn't recognize it. And that
So
was
when you, well, which pieces was it?
I don't even remember. But it was a shock to see that piece and recognize it as a piece of art and not as a piece of me.
When you see it and you say you see technique, do you see things that you wish you would have done different? Are you happy and at peace with them, with pieces when you complete them?
Oh, I think probably artists always see something they could improve or would have done differently, or whatever. And that's just the name of the game, you know. I mean, you can do it as well as you possibly can, but it's an organic process. And you can always think, you know, if I'd have moved that tree to the left, it wouldn't have coincided with this corner of this, or what have you. Or if I'd have just made this value a little brighter, this would have been a little more interesting down here. You know, and the skill of being really good at a medium is the skill of being able to accommodate those mistakes. That's the real skill. Once you have the skill, you're able, once you know your medium and you trust your medium well enough, you can gamble with it because you know you can work your way out. What the amateur suffers from is not knowing the medium well enough. So you panic and you overcompensate in the wrong way. In my case, with the pen and ink, knowing that the only thing I can do is add more line means that I have to know where the cutoff point is for that, where I can't go any farther, but where I still have grace down here. This area is not light enough, but this is still not so dark. I can't come in and darken this a little bit more, and that's going to make this a little bit lighter. But if I've already gone too far here, that's out of the question. I've got to do something else. And that's what real skill amounts to. And that's what years and years and years of doing anything. I mean, a carpenter, for crying out loud, knows if they chip something, what they can do here, what have you. You know, it's just skill. It's just craft.
Now, is there anything looking back that over your artist career that you would have changed early on or changed in the course of your career that would have adjusted your trajectory?
Yeah, I think I've paid some prices being self-taught. I've reinvented an awful lot of wheels. And I think had I been in a serious art curriculum early, I might have sculpted. I loved sculpture. I might have done more media sooner. I might have learned more about criticizing my own work, all of those kinds of things. I mean, I've had professionals tell me, well, there are advantages to doing it the way I did it, because you kind of come to your own way and so forth. And that's probably true, but there are also prices for that too. I mean, you know, I don't know that there's any perfect way either way, but I wish I'd have had more exposure to media sooner.
So is that advice you would give a young artist, someone who's just getting started, how they could shape their career?
Yeah.
But,
When you're doing it on your own, absolutely on your own, like I said, you just have to reinvent a lot of things. And some of them never get invented because you don't know enough about what the options are. I would have probably handled pen and ink differently in many ways if I'd have known sooner to do something other than just crosshatch. But the way I started was just, I started doing science illustration as a freshman in college. They found I worked in the zoo department. They found I could draw. They gave me a flexible nib pen and a bottle of ink. They needed drawings for publication. So I started that way. Then in about 1960, I discovered the technical pen and I worked with that. And then all through college, including my graduate years, through my master's, I illustrated. I drew, and it was all literal. I mean, I drew 2 or 3 years in a fishery lab where I had an aquarium behind me, and they would bring in a fish, and I would look at the fish and count the scales and do this fish as literally as I could possibly do it in pen. Well, that's just a totally conditioning process. So after a while, the only thing I did was crosshatch. Well, the good thing is I became extremely good at it because that's all I did. The bad thing is that's all I did. So those are the kinds of things that you can short circuit, I think, with somebody as a mentor or somebody who says, you might want to consider doing this for a while, or you might want to do this, or try this, or why don't you use the brush with ink for a while instead of the pen and see what that does. So those are all, things that. So it is now. It's too late.
Words of wisdom, all the young artists out there and parents of young artists, encourage.
Yeah.
Okay, and you mentioned, I know the pen, the art, you had the exhibit at the convention center a couple of years ago, pen and ink, it wasn't pen and ink.
No, it was a combination of things.
Yes, it was you and Richard. Yes. I mean, it wasn't, but I was trying to think of the name of the exhibit and it is not coming to me right now.
Pen and paint, I think it was.
Pen and paint, that was it. I knew it was some. And the exhibits from Leda and the Swan, are there any exhibits that you're working on or that you would like to do in the future that would be, the dream exhibit or the next exhibit that you would like to put together?
Right now, I'm working primarily in watercolor. Because I'm just kind of at a point where I think I'm beginning to kind of get it. What I do is okay, but it's a question of knowing that medium like I know the pen, which I don't, which means that I struggle a lot more than somebody who already knows that medium. Somebody like Richard, who knows the medium well enough, for instance, that he's not struggling with it. I'm still really thinking about it when I do it, and often thinking about it wrong. So that's part of it. So I'm not working on subject matter per se, although I've had a tendency to kind of want to go back and do the pen and watercolor kind of things again, and maybe do some kind of mythological kind of subject matter. I'm just a real sucker for the combination of birds of prey and people and myth and that kind of thing. I like the mystery.
Well, I would love to see an exhibit like that of because I wasn't in Hot Springs yet, I guess, or when the previous exhibits were featuring mythology, and that seems very interesting to me. But so I'll look for it. So I guess, is there anything that I did not ask that you would like to share that I should have?
No, I think you do a super job.
Oh, well, I wasn't fishing. So is there anything that you would like to share?
Maybe the fact that I'm just really grateful for this community. As somebody with no art background doing pen and ink in a small southern town, that's not very probable for existing and making a living. And this town has supported me and been behind me and encouraged me. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for a wife who's been gutsy every step of the road. I mean, when you've got two small children, 1 and 5, and you say, okay, I'm leaving my university position, I'm going to be an artist. And she says, well, okay. If I'd had somebody that said, we have to have new drapes, it wouldn't have worked. So I had somebody that got in the boat with me and rowed as hard as I did. And I'm really grateful for that. My kids were the same way. They didn't complain because they didn't have an automobile, or they didn't have the latest shoes, or they didn't have what have you. But our home was a depot for their friends. Their friends worked at my drawing board with me. I had always had a big sheet of mat board covering the drawing board. And they would come in and draw on it, leave me messages, work on it, and so forth. So those became the kind of things that really were why I did this in the first place, and that paid off. So, like Campbell says, follow your bliss.
And I'm going to end with that then. I guess I should go back to Paul first and see if there are any questions.
Hello. Well, that was fantastic. First of all, I want to read one of the best comments I've ever seen on one of these virtual programs from Queenie. She says, thanks, Gary. I learned so much about you and your art. I hope you know what a treasure you are to Hot Springs. Please don't minimize your gift and talent. Those of us who don't share your talent are in awe.
Oh, well, thank you very much.
Very kind.
Amen to that. Absolutely. So eloquently stated too. When you were talking about how supportive the community has been to you. I mean, you are such a vibrant part of our art community and our community as a whole. You are supported because you are so involved and have been so involved. And June as well. I mean, your family, your wife, you're just an integral part of our arts community and our community as a whole.
Well, as the cliche goes, it takes a village.
Yes, absolutely.
She had some kind words for you too, Mary. She said, wonderful interview with great questions.
There you go, Mary.
And even for me, she said, another triumph for our library, which I'm glad
absolutely
to bring great programming like this.
I would add very briefly that our library is absolutely one of the city's big treasures. It really is. And it's become, it's like a community center, and that's just remarkable, I think, for a library.
Well, we appreciate that. A couple questions for you. It was very clear the love and respect you have for animals that comes across in your art. So a couple questions out of that. First of all, would you say you would have gravitated toward art without that love for animals? And second, would you say the best art comes from something you resonate with or you're passionate about?
I probably would have done the art anyway. I mean, it's a disease that you can't outrun. I mean, you're going to go to the grave with it. What was the second part of the question?
Would you say that the best art comes from something you're
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's really evident, for instance, when you're doing life drawing. If there's not some kind of connection, if there's not some kind of empathy going on there between you and the model, it kind of shows in the drawing. But I notice in my case, when I'm drawing and I really care about the subject, it's a whole different experience. The trap is for instance, if you're commissioned to do something and you care too much about the person or whatever it is, you get trapped by your own anxiety to do a good job. So that's kind of difficult to overcome.
Makes sense. What do you think the future is for the medium of pen and ink?
Oh, I don't know. It's going to be around forever, I think. But media go through periods. For instance, watercolor is the big favorite right now. It's the love child of the media world. Back in my heroes are back in the turn of the century with the pen and ink artist, where pen and ink was absolutely prevalent in everything, and partly because of the limitations in publication and so forth. But I think it'll swing. I mean, there'll be another. It might be oil later, or it might be something else. Printmaking for a while was kind of a hot thing. So you never know where the public's going. And maybe it depends in part on whether there's some kind of superstar that emerges and takes it somewhere. I don't know. I mean, you got a guy like Muka, for instance, doing Art Nouveau, for crying out loud. Who could not love that, and be interested in it? So.
Mary asked you quite a few questions, and then throughout you gave some good advice for aspiring artists. But is there any final advice you can think of you'd like to share?
Practice, 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 practice. You have to, if you want to be good at it, and this is true of anything. It doesn't matter what it is. If you don't do it all the time with a kind of passion, then you're not going to be very good at it. And I'm not convinced that talent isn't mostly about passion, because I think, there are some kind of natural kind of inclinations, but I think, as athletes have proven, if you're passionate enough, you can overcome the lack of that talent and achieve a great deal. So it's a matter of practice.
You got a shout out from Linda. She says, "Love you, Gary Simmons."
Well, I love her too.
All right. Well, we appreciate everyone who watched tonight, and you are welcome to and encouraged to share this video with those who aren't able to watch live. There's a recorded version of this broadcast on Facebook and YouTube. And had another comment come in. That's the last one I'll read off, from Jim Larkin. We know him. He was the first guest in this Gary Walk Talk series. He says, "Gary, I feel your finest art is that of living well through friendships."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Absolutely. You should know.
All right. Well, I'm going to give both of you an opportunity to share any final remarks.
Oh, I just thank you, and I appreciate being here.
Absolutely. And thanks to Gary. I put this on Facebook when I shared it on Facebook earlier. A dear friend, just an incredible person, and a very talented artist. Thank you so much for being with us, for all the beauty that you share with all of us, Gary, for the wisdom and advice and creativity, and that you just make brings and the world a better place by the marks that you make on the paper.
Thank you, Mary. I love you.
I love you back.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Thank you always. Thank you. And everybody, Gallery Walk is August 6th, 32nd Gallery Walk, and Gary's work at Justice Gallery on August 6th, or anytime between now and then. The galleries are open. And Birth of an Artist, celebrating some future artists, is August 14th. So some dates for the calendar.
Yes. And do we have an artist for our August program?
No, I do not have that confirmed yet, but I'll be back in touch with you to let you know.
Sounds good. And everyone stay tuned for that. You'll see it announced on our various social medias. And once again, thank you for watching. Have a good night.
Thank you.